As NATO looks at its future role, one of the most important elements will be how it works with others.
Is NATO able to solve all the global problems? I don't think so. It's not NATO's mission, first. And secondly, we are not that powerful.
I think it's absolutely vital for NATO to understand and to, in this strategic concept, to clearly lay out that we live in a world where it's no longer possible for one organization, just as it is no longer possible for one country, to deal with the challenges that we face. Alone, we're all going to fail.
How NATO works with partners will need to vary according to the conditions and individual cases.
Well, NATO is not the only organization. It is a basic pillar of international security, of our national security. There are activities that no one can replace NATO. On the other hand, there are many other issues of global impact where NATO is one of many actors.
It is not a kind of digital answer. This is for NATO and this is not for NATO. I think sometimes something is NATO should be in the lead and maybe kind of sole entity to face the threat. Sometimes maybe NATO is hardly involved, but maybe still contributory. But I think there is probably quite a large middle group.
And it's important that NATO works with, and not just for, other organizations.
If NATO would be the subcontractor of all these institutions, then you could put NATO's headquarters into a service center in Bangalore, where a friendly voice answers the phone by saying, basically, thank you for calling 1-800-NATO. If you need an airlift operation, press 1. If you need stability operations, press 2. So this is not the job of NATO.
The level of cooperation with some organizations, such as with the EU, has not been optimal. Failure to improve these ties could lead to grave consequences.
If, for instance, NATO and EU doesn't get its acts together in Afghanistan, people will die. And it will be French, like Germans, like Americans, like Poles, like Canadians who die. So therefore, we cannot afford these beauty contests anymore, which for many, many years prevented a more efficient cooperation between these institutions.
I see no explanation, no excuse for the current level of cooperation between NATO and European Union, for example. We need each other, we are based on the same values.
The close cooperation between these institutions just to get, for instance, the civil and the military effort in Afghanistan together is absolutely inevitable. The problem is that it's much easier said than done.
And the cooperation does not need to be limited to increased working with other organizations. Non-NATO countries can play important partner roles too.
NATO today is a global institution without being the global cop or the world policeman. NATO's global role does not mean that the membership is global, but the interests are global, therefore the horizon has to be global, and that's why NATO needs partners.
Calling for new partnerships is not a new idea.
There is not much strength in the finger of one hand. But when 5 fingers are balled into a fist, you have a considerable instrument of defense. All of us are also ready, as conditions change, to turn that fist into a hand of friendship.
But the partnerships in dealing with global problems could even lead to a change in major relationships.
After some very hard work, Russians should and can apply to NATO, but of course it will not be called North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but Atlantic Pacific Security Organization, or whatever. But we should aim to do that in view of all the difficulties and dangers and catastrophes which are in the making in the broader Middle East, in Afghanistan, in Iran, in North Korea, etc., etc. On all of those issues we are together, with nuances, each looking for its little advantage, but basically we are together. I think that without partnership, some of the problems are simply not solved.
Partnerships have already proved crucial in Afghanistan. NATO will have to develop even more for potentially greater challenges in the future.
NATO has a huge number of so-called global partners, countries like Australia or New Zealand, which are like-minded, political, and which fight side at side in Afghanistan. So NATO will need and is developing very efficiently a network of these partners.
Good cooperation with different entities and good cooperation with non-NATO countries, I think it is a no-brainer that in the future world that is even more important than it was 20 years ago.
One of the ways we're going to maximize our impact on international affairs is through cooperation with other organizations, be they regional like the European Union or the African Union or global like the United Nations. That's where the future of this alliance lies.